Good morning, everyone, and latecomers may be seated. So, as some of you may recall, in the year 2000, we solved all the problems in science. Bill Clinton gave a press conference announcing that we had written out the human genome. It was decoded. Everything was great. Game over. About 2 weeks later, proteomics got a lot more attention, and the complexity underlying the human genome began to be exploited. And what seemed like the end of biology turned out to be the beginning of a whole new era, which at first was extremely mystifying and daunting because of the complexity of proteins and other behaviors going further and further, and also their relationships. And parallel with that, we got very lucky in the form of cloud computing, new data sets, the ability to share data online, and the computational ability to start to look at various results in time and in interaction, so that we got a whole new vision of biology as a system. That's a short version of why these three gentlemen are changing human understanding and changing the treatment of disease, each in different ways. And I think the goal today is to get a good understanding of where we are now in understanding biology as a system, what this is going to do to both treatments and the system around treatments of the healthcare industry and of regulatory control and of education. That would be a pretty effective 30 minutes. So let's start with a broad question, starting down the line, and then I might go individually. How different is this period compared to what came before? And looking at this new development of biology as a larger system and a data set, what drove you to make the decisions behind each company? And I'd like you to begin by introducing yourself and maybe speaking very briefly about what your company does, then go into why you made the decision you did about why to pursue that angle in this.
So good morning. I'm Dimitrios Iliopoulos. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Therapeutics. I'm in academia and research for more than 15 years, initially as a faculty at Harvard Medical School, Department of Immunology and Microbiology, and then at UCLA in the School of Medicine, where I founded the Center for Systems Biomedicine. So in Athos, we are an AI software and clinical stage biotech company that we develop precision therapeutics for patients with autoimmune diseases. We're excited because through our AI platform and software, currently we have a drug in phase 2 clinical trial that both the target, it's a first-in-class small molecule called 8863, with applicability in different autoimmune diseases, and our initial focus is ulcerative colitis, an autoimmune disease of the GI tract. About your question, I think the technology now allows us to be able to start exploring the complexity of biology. We know that it's not anymore only genomics. As you mentioned, we have multiple layers of information, that they are epigenetics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics. Systems are very complex, and there's no way to be able to analyze this kind of information, also in an unbiased way, without using computational biology and AI. So I think the way that research was done 10 years ago, it's totally different from what we see right now. And both in academia and also in the industry, things have changed a lot because, again, of the technologies, the software that are available allow us to do this kind of research that, in our case, has to do with drug development and discovery and development.
And let me add to my earlier question. How far are you from a proof point in the clinical world?
I mean, the approval, the main point I want to make about platforms, and because there's a lot of hype and discussion about AI, is when a company, I think, has clinical data for the first time showing that something that was computationally predicted, if it's the target, or small molecule, or a peptide, or an antibody, that what has been developed, there's evidence related to the safety or the efficacy mechanism of action in patient population. I think this is the critical moment that everyone is waiting. And the more efforts, the more companies we see going towards this direction, I think people will start believing on AI and drug development, and it's not going to be just a theory and hypothesis that we use tools here and there, but actually what we're seeing right now and what is the result of that.
Mm-hmm. Mike?
So I took an industry perspective to this sort of question. You know, I spent 18 years at Merck, and what plagued me was that the underlying business model for the large pharmaceutical industry.
Excuse me, Mike, your name and your company.
Mike Nally, CEO of Generative Biomedicines. We make protein-based biotherapeutics using machine learning.
Fantastic, go.
But I had been in large pharma, saw that both research productivity was lagging down year over year for 40 years, and the business model was being propped up by pricing practices that actually undermine patient access to medicines. And when you have those two factors together, what has basically been protecting that industry has been patents and scale. And you know, I believe that there was a moment in time that with the help of technology, we'd have an opportunity to understand biology in ways that the human mind has not been able to understand it. You know, if you think about all of the innovations that the industry has had, all of that humanity has had, we still only understand about 5 to 10% of biology. And with the help of machines, I think it's inarguable that over the course of the next decade, our understanding of biology will at least match what we gained in the last century. And if we're able to do that, ultimately we're going to come up with some really important innovations that will cure and treat some of the most grievous illnesses on this planet. And I think that's what's so exciting to me about this moment in time. The technologies are here, and they're working. The problem is we still don't have high enough quality measurements of data, of biology, to answer all of these questions in a more definitive way. We're not limited by compute today. We're not limited by the computational techniques. We're limited by high quality, high resolution data of biology, our ability to effectively measure the dynamic systems that ultimately drive biological function. But those tools are progressing rapidly as well, and I think that's this convergence of compute, of techniques, of measurement are now starting to help us understand these systems in ways that were previously unimaginable. And I think to your point on where are we, we're starting to see the clinical data. So we've had 2 molecules that have entered the clinic. We've shown we have proof of concept data on those 2 molecules. And what these first 2 molecules are optimization cases where we're basically asking the question, can we take current standard of care and make the optimal medicine for patients with this condition? And what we're seeing is an ability to take, in asthma, a single injection every 6 months to avoid exacerbations of asthma or COPD. These sort of innovations will actually change how care is provided at a local level. The next generation of innovations will actually be coming up with new biological and molecular constructs that allow us to drug what is currently perceived to be the undruggable. And those techniques, I think, are a couple of years away in earnest, but they're advancing very, very, very quickly.
How far away do you think the asthma treatment is?
We already have the data. I mean, the FDA or the MHRA, who we visited last 2 weeks ago, want us to take it from phase 1 to phase 3 starting in October.
Okay, so they are not hindered by fears of this behaving in some novel, strange way.
Well, importantly, we're actually being very clear to the agencies that we want to be held to the same standard as existing medicines. We don't want to change the standard until we can actually show reproducibility over time. I think we have a compelling argument after the 5th, the 10th version that shows that we're able to predict the effect. But until we've been able to do that very, very clearly, what we don't want to do is undermine what we think is a transcendent moment in technology and actually have a patient safety issue that could undermine this for a decade or more.
Mm-hmm. And Dole, I'm glad you're last, because what you represent is adding another layer of very necessary complexity to understanding the overall picture. So in your case, could you talk about yourself, your company, and a little bit about your background that informs why you're choosing to do what you're doing?
Right, yeah, thank you, Quentin. My name is Toro Grapel. I run machine learning at Altos Labs, and our mission is to reverse disease by tapping into the power of rejuvenation or partial reprogramming. And so it's a very ambitious mission because what we're looking for is really a foundational therapy, because it doesn't tackle each individual disease, but it aims at rejuvenating tissues and cells and thereby making them more resilient to all kinds of disease vectors. And so we hope that that will create a platform from which we can then tackle many different medical needs, in particular age-related diseases. I'm actually a newbie to this whole world because I only joined this community about 3 years ago. Previously, I was at DeepMind doing AI research, and the games, if you like, that I was tackling there were so much simpler. We were doing chess and Go. Some of you may be familiar with the AlphaGo project, where we created this machine that was able to beat the strongest players at the game of Go, later also chess and other games, purely by training and self-improving by playing against itself. And so when I joined the biomedical community, I knew I was tackling such a more complex game than those. And I would like to convey to you how much more complex it is, because it is multi-scale in a way that no other phenomenon is. You know, an organism like a human is roughly, according to a physicist, roughly 1 meter in size, let it be 2. And the molecules that we're trying to build, they are at the nanometer scale. So they're 9 orders of magnitude away from where we want to see the impact. You know, there's like a factor of 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 between the layer where we want to inject a drug and the organismal effect that we want to have at the scale of an organism. And so it's a miracle that we can create any drugs at all, because there's so much complexity along these scales. And so we're clearly tapping into these exponential trends, exponential compute, exponential data. Everything gets cheaper in terms of data production. But what we're up against is also a huge complexity. And so, yes, we now need compute to process all the data. For example, we work on hundreds of million single-cell RNA data sets. But on the other hand, for any specific level of the problem, any specific disease, any specific gene, we have very little data. And so that's really the big problem that we need to tackle with AI, to bring all the different sources of prior knowledge to bear on these questions. And ultimately, to close the experimental loop between the AI system and the experiment, so that the AI system can hypothesize and help us set hypotheses, and then verify those hypotheses in experiment and make that loop as tight and as fast as possible. And, you know, when we were working on AlphaGo and tackling chess and Go, we could play 40 million games of chess, and the system became incredibly strong at what it was doing. But that's because one game of chess can be played in fractions of a second, whereas in biology, still the experimental cycle is so much slower. In vitro, it's a bit faster, but in vivo, you know, we're talking about the lifespan of mice for one iteration. And so overcoming these problems, I think, is the great challenge. But certainly without AI and machine learning, it would be completely impossible.
See, this is the problem. The universe has had a 15 billion year head start on making things complex. And you're trying to catch up as best as you can.
Indeed.
And I think, you know, to oversimplify things a little bit, but to give a flavor of that, at every one of those orders of magnitude, every one of those times tens, that's 10 times as many interactions going up and up and up, and trying to map all of those and develop an understanding, and then a certain time scale on top of that for another complexity. How long is it taking each one of these things to happen? as it lingers, what else happens, like dependencies beyond understanding, that we will attempt to capture in some computational way. Now, all of this takes place against a global healthcare and regulatory system valued in, anybody got a good number? Trillions? Some trillions of dollars, with tens of thousands, millions of dedicated professionals. How much does this disrupt existing systems? It's kind of a jump ball question, but actually let me put it to you, Mike, because as you talked, I thought, you know, as laggy and as old world the existing drug treatments are, that's their cash flow, you know. What does this world going to mean for the existing cash flow of legacy drugs if they can be lapsed by things that are developed quickly, faster, and more effectively?
Well, I think one truism is that, again, the cost of healthcare is unaffordable in every part of the world. And the rate of growth of healthcare spending has been a problem that every country around the world is grappling with and has been grappling with for the last couple of decades. I see these tools as a huge means toward driving toward a more sustainable future in healthcare, right? And I think whether that's through the interventions in therapeutics, whether that's through rethinking hospital workflows, thinking about patient care, thinking about the devices that we wear, there's a huge opportunity here to reimagine healthcare and ideally actually getting away from sick care and driving toward a more preventative future of health. And to me, that is, I think, the real promise that we all are kind of looking at. I think these tools are going to change, I think, interventions massively. I think the human side of change is actually going to be the more problematic piece, how care is delivered locally. But if you just, again, in a very simple way, a lot of healthcare is delivered based on the individual experience of an individual clinician and what they can actually consume in terms of the readings and the cases that they have reviewed. The reality is, as we've seen with large language models, we're going to now start to be able to diagnose with the collective insight of the world. These tools are going to help us attack disease in really, really profound ways across so many different domains. And I think the real question is how do we integrate these in ways that are very patient-friendly and that don't disrupt, well, I guess we have to disrupt the existing workflows.
Yeah, all very positive, but you talk to Amgen, you talk to Novartis, you talk to Big Pharma. Are they ready for this change in time scale and how it might change?
No, because,
their cash flow?
again, a lot of the organizations that are kind of in the kind of the biggest organizations aren't skilled at this intersection. If you look at the research workforces of most of the large pharmaceutical companies, there's about 5% of the workforce that's skilled at the intersection of science and technology. And you don't need it to be 100%, but you probably need it to be 35 to 40% for this to work.
Demetrius, you're nodding vigorously.
Oh, I am, because as Mike mentioned, I don't think Big Pharma is ready yet. I think it will take efforts like what we do, and companies like to show the proof of concept that things are working. We identify targets, we develop novel therapeutics, they work in the clinic, phase 2, phase 3 data, some drugs will be FDA approved. And then I think things will start to change. We all know, and I think you will agree, that pharma is one of the slowest industries, very conservative. So when we compare the software world with pharma, there's a huge difference on timelines and what pharma thinks is fast versus what we see what is fast in the software world. But the talent, one example to give you, in some pharma companies, even when we discuss with them, they don't have like CIOs. They don't have digital health teams. And we are talking about big pharma, that they have hundreds of thousands of employees all over the world. So I agree, it's less than 5% in most companies. We start to see some pharma to be the early adopters, but still, the process is slow.
Let's talk about the talent pipeline a bit. You come from academia. Has this revolution in systems biology affected the way people are trained? Are we seeing people coming up who are adept in the old world, but now the new world?
Look, the training, I think, is changing and is going to change. I think the new talent and people that we want is people that they have experience both in biology, computer science, or combination of chemistry and computer science. I think we start to see this kind of dual degrees that are available on multiple levels, even at the PhD level. And I think things that still we want to see is, like in medicine, clinicians, to start be able to be more comfortable with AI and technologies, which is something that still we are not seeing. And the other complex area that I would like to point out, and I think Mike mentioned, is about attorneys, patent attorneys, AI, drug development. Also, this is an area that we need people with more than one expertise to be able to have this. So I think, yes, we start to have this kind of talent. Unfortunately, this talent doesn't come in the medical field. I mean, it prefers, and especially here in LA, to be in the gaming industry or in finance world. But I think as we go, we're going to see, especially with the younger generations, that they move towards this direction because they are more used and with apps and the daily things that they have for
I'd like
their
to pull
life.
on this a little bit more with you, Thor, because you're just a simple Go player who ended up, challenging the future of biology.
Right.
Where do you find your talent? Are you hiring in the CS world? Are you hiring out of the biology world? Is the answer all of the above?
Yeah, it's a great
Are people
question.
coming up with multiple skills? And when you have, those are all different ways of seeing the world. When they combine, what happens?
Yeah, I think we need to build this talent. So when I came into Altos and built the team, I hired computational biologists and I hired machine learning people. And some of the machine learning people had never really done biology. I mean, ideally, they were interested in it, right? And then we brought them together and had reading groups and whiteboarding sessions and talks from both sides so that people could learn about each other's skills.
Yeah, you're almost building a new language.
Yeah, yeah. And I have to say, I never thought that it was that true, but this interdisciplinary work really is very, very hard because there are two different languages and people can really talk completely past each other. I think this is a challenge that we need to tackle. I wanted to say something else about zooming out and the effects on healthcare. So one concept that is central to our work is that of health span. So when I tell people that I work in longevity and rejuvenation, often there are concerns, people will get infinitely old, and what about our social systems, and other questions. But the truth is that we're not actually that interested in that. We're interested in compressing the period of morbidity or in lengthening the health span. So we have a shared picture. If you think of your normal super health as 100%, then as you age, this will decline and your capabilities will go down and so on. And at some point, we'll all wither away, right? And this period...
The morbid term for this is your sick span. The time in life where it really isn't so fun. But keep going.
Exactly. And so the problem is, even though we've made tremendous progress in terms of healthcare and so on, the fraction or the ratio between your sick span and your health span has really not changed that much. So we've both prolonged people's health span, but at the cost of also prolonging their sick span. And so really what we would like to aim for is a compression of this morbidity so that, in a cartoonish way, ideally you live the most wonderful, healthy life, and at some point it ends without that period where we're withering away. And I think that should really be the goal to aim at. And then all kinds of societal consequences will also be more beneficial because people who are healthy can still contribute meaningfully, lead meaningful lives, and so on. And then I think we could all be happy with maybe a natural maximum lifespan of 120, which is roughly the human maximum lifespan.
Okay, I'll see you all at Monty 75. And I'll be right up here talking about what's next. And let's take that idea about adjacencies and continuations into the other areas you see being affected. And let me just set some context. When you started with chess had a finite number of moves and really good data. And then you played Go, more complexity, but also extremely high quality, reliable data. Like a Go game was a Go game. It played itself and got better against a very finite, high quality data set. Even in proteomics, when we were talking earlier, you said we started with 1,000 proteins and each one was a PhD. Each one was a series of quality data. And I think in medical care generally, the data is very good. Will these insights apply to other areas where the data is not as high quality? Or is that a revolution waiting to happen, a data quality revolution in a way? And there are some adjacencies. For example, Demetrius, you mentioned agriculture may benefit as well. Talk about this a little bit.
I think the data, I mean, it's a great point, and as Thor mentioned, AI will be useful, and any kind of tool that we develop, it will have great data and high-quality data. And I think both healthcare and other industries, like culture, like for animal health, we are missing these data sets. So I think all of us, we want to go fast. All of us, we want to go in the clinic, have FDA-approved drugs. But I think what will change things and how we develop new therapies and they're going to be more effective is first to understand better the molecular basis of these biological systems and of diseases. Still, we don't have a good understanding. And this is because we don't have the data. I mean, I think the exception of cancer, that there were a lot of efforts and NCI and NIH invested a lot of money a few decades ago, and we have high-quality data for most cancer types. If we think about autoimmune diseases, neurological diseases, we have zero data. So there should be an effort, both from the government and these agencies and from companies, to generate high-quality data. And I think by having high-quality data, this will be the driver that will help us to innovate and develop novel therapies. Mm-hmm. In our case, in Athos, like for specific diseases, as I mentioned, like colitis, the first step that we did as a company is we developed a data set. We took patients, characterized in multiple levels, had high-quality clinical data, performed longitudinal studies, because these are complex diseases, highly dynamic. It's not just to have one data point and, at one time point. So you need, like, the diseases change very frequently. So having a data set, this is what a high-quality data set helps us to identify a target and move faster and more accurately and effectively into the clinic.
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a clear rationale why we started where we started. So we started with proteins, and a number of your colleagues started with proteins as well, because there were two foundational data sets. The sequencing revolution had given us 180 million amino acid sequences as we sequenced every species on the planet. And then there was a structural biology community that actually had 200,000 high-quality, high-resolution structures of proteins, which was a very data-rich source of information because you're looking at the 3D coordinates of every structure. That was an example where we had measured biology very, very effectively, and therefore the tools were much more, could access that system. We're going to do the same thing across cells. We're going to do the same thing across tissues. It's a question of how quickly we can collect the data, how effective are the tools to measure these systems. And ultimately, what you're going to want to try and do is consume all of the literature. You're going to want to try and drive different hypotheses. But ultimately, your long-term goal is to ultimately be able to effectively mimic the human system and predict with high quality. We're a long way from that, right? I think that vision is probably decades away. I'd love to be wrong on that. We just don't have the measurements, and the complexity of these systems, as Tori noted, are extraordinary. But I think we're on a path where we don't have to solve biology entirely. If we could double or triple our knowledge of biology, the transformative impact on humanity would be extraordinary. The transformative impact on domains like sustainability, domains like agriculture, would change the course of this planet in very, very positive ways. And I think that's the encouraging path that I think we're starting to traverse.
Dore, last word.
Since we're out of time, let me just say, data is queen.
Well, well. It's great to have a revolution because it involves all these new encouraging challenges as well. Somebody go out there and build a quality data business that can count things in a reliable way in many contexts. And the revolution we're seeing here will happen in so many other industries. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.